Parents choose my sister's dinner instead of my birthday. So I bought a country home and posted, "Stay with me while I tell you what happened, and if my story connects with you, I'd love for you to share it. Leave a like and subscribe for more stories like this." My name is Haley Monroe. I'm 28 years old, a nurse who has spent most of her life giving, caring, and trying to make people feel seen. But the strange thing is, in my own family, I was the one who was always invisible. I had been looking forward to my birthday for weeks. I'm not someone who usually asks for much, but this year, I wanted a simple dinner with my parents. Nothing fancy, just the three of us, a home-cooked meal, and a chance to feel like I mattered. I set everything up. I picked the restaurant weeks ahead, made the reservation, and even rearranged my hospital shifts so I'd be free that evening. In my heart, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally show up for me the way I've always shown up for them. I sent them little reminders, even texted my mom that morning saying, "Can't wait to see you tonight. It means a lot to me." She just sent back a smiley face. As the hours ticked closer, I was almost childlike in my excitement. I curled my hair, put on the dress I'd been saving, and told myself this night was going to be different. I drove to the restaurant early, waited at the table, and glanced at the door every time it opened. But as the minutes turned into an hour, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Something came up. Chelsea has a big dinner tonight with her bosses. Such an important career milestone. We couldn't miss it. Rain check." I remember staring at the words, my heart dropping into my stomach. Chelsea. Of course. It was always Chelsea. She was 4 years younger, the golden child, the one who never had to lift a finger because everyone lifted things for her. New car at 16. College fully paid for. Every little win of hers was celebrated with champagne and balloons. And here I was, 28, eating cold bread rolls alone on my own birthday because my parents once again chose her over me. I tried to smile at the waiter when he came by, but my throat was tight. "They're not coming," I whispered. Saying it out loud made the pain sharper. I felt small, foolish, like the little girl who used to wait by the window for her parents to show up at school plays only to see empty seats. That night, something inside me cracked. It wasn't just about a birthday dinner. It was about years of being invisible. And for the first time, I started wondering, what would happen if I stopped waiting for them to choose me, and chose myself instead? When I think back, the truth was always there. I just didn't want to see it. Chelsea was the shining star in our house, and I was the steady shadow. At 16, she was handed the keys to a brand new car with a bow on top. I can still remember Dad saying, "She needs this to get to her activities, Haley. You understand." Meanwhile, I was borrowing an old second-hand car from a neighbor, praying it wouldn't break down on my way to my part-time job. When college came around, the pattern grew even clearer. My parents poured everything into Chelsea's tuition, her dorm, her new laptop, even a monthly allowance so she could focus on her studies. For me, it was different. I had dreamed of becoming a nurse since I was a little girl, but I had to juggle long hours at a diner just to pay my way through school. While Chelsea was posting pictures of campus parties, I was folding napkins in the back room during my break, sneaking in chapters from my textbooks. Even our birthdays told the story. Chelsea's 16th had balloons, a rented hall, music, the whole neighborhood invited. Mine. A small cake at home with a, "You're so responsible, Haley, we know you don't need much." Their gifts to me were always practical. New shoes for work, a set of pans when I moved into my apartment, things that said function, but never love. Chelsea's gifts sparkled, jewelry, surprise trips, concert tickets. I smiled through mine, but inside I wondered why I wasn't worth the same kind of joy. Whenever I asked, or even hinted at the unfairness, Mom would give me the same gentle answer. "Chelsea just needs a little more support. She's not as strong as you, honey." Dad would nod and add, "You've always been the dependable one. That's a good thing." It was like being punished for being resilient. My strength became their excuse to ignore me. The worst part was how normal it felt. I taught myself to swallow the disappointment, to keep moving. Every late-night shift, every exam passed on too little sleep, every time I paid another bill with money I barely had, I told myself this was what being the older sister meant. Carrying the load so the younger one could shine. But deep down, the truth gnawed at me. I wasn't strong because I wanted to be. I was strong because I had no choice. I was the afterthought, the one they didn't worry about, the one they assumed would always manage on her own. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the car, not the parties, not the money, but the quiet message behind it all. Chelsea was worth their sacrifices, and I was not. It took me years to finally name it for what it was: favoritism. Plain and simple. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. The restaurant reservation had been canceled, but I couldn't bring myself to go home and sit in silence on my birthday. I drove aimlessly for a while, tears blurring the road signs, until I saw the soft glow of a roadside diner. The neon sign flickered, open, and something about it felt like a lifeline. I pulled in, wiped my face quickly, and stepped inside. The diner was nearly empty, just the low hum of an old jukebox in the corner and the smell of coffee that had probably been sitting for hours. I slid into a booth by the window, pretending to look at the menu even though my stomach felt too tight to eat. That's when the waiter walked over. He was around my age, maybe a little older, with kind eyes that seemed to notice more than I wanted him to. His name tag read Derek. He set down a glass of water and smiled softly. "Rough day?" he asked, not in a nosy way, but in the way people do when they've seen enough lonely faces to recognize one. I tried to brush it off. Just a birthday dinner that didn't quite work out. My voice cracked more than I meant it to. His eyebrows lifted. "Birthday? Well, that changes things. Coffee's on the house, and I'll see if I can find a candle in the back. No one should spend their birthday without at least that." I laughed weakly, a sound that felt strange after the lump in my throat all evening. He wasn't trying too hard, just offering kindness in a way that didn't make me feel pitted. When he brought over a slice of pie with a tiny candle stuck in it, I almost cried. We talked for a while, about simple things, how long he'd worked at the diner, how I was a nurse pulling long shifts, the way small towns seem to hold their own kind of stories. Every time he asked me something, he actually listened, like my answers mattered. That small act cut deeper than my parents' absence. My own family couldn't show up for me, but a stranger with no obligation at all made me feel seen. As I forked through the pie, I thought about the years I'd spent hoping for love and attention from people who only ever had it from my sister. I thought about how many times I'd excused it, told myself it wasn't so bad, that I was just stronger. But sitting there in that quiet booth, with a stranger reminding me that I deserved more than scraps, something inside me shifted. I realized I was done begging. Done waiting at tables for people who wouldn't come. Done twisting myself into knots just to be noticed. If my own family couldn't give me the love I craved, then I'd have to give it to myself. That night, with a melted candle and a half-eaten slice of pie, I made a quiet promise. Never again would I let myself feel this small. The night after her lonely birthday, Haley sat in her small apartment, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting in her tired eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the empty chair across from her at the restaurant reservation that had never been used, the text from her mother, the laughter she imagined at Chelsea's big dinner. Her chest felt heavy, like a stone she couldn't push away. Out of habit, she opened a browser, meaning to scroll through nursing articles or recipes she'd never try. But instead, almost without thinking, she clicked into a real estate website. The search bar blinked at her, waiting. She typed, "Homes for sale in Maine." She didn't know why she picked Maine. Maybe the thought of wide fields, tall trees, and a place far away from her parents' expectations. Listings appeared. Cottages with chipped paint, farmhouses with wraparound porches, places that looked like they'd been forgotten but still stood strong. She clicked through picture after picture, her heart tugging in a way it hadn't in years. She imagined herself waking up to the sound of birds instead of traffic, drinking coffee on a porch no one else had ever claimed, and walking through fields where no one compared her to her sister. For the first time, she wasn't daydreaming about winning her parents' approval. She was daydreaming about freedom. Her savings account wasn't overflowing, but it wasn't empty either. Years of double shifts, skipped vacations, and careful budgeting had left her with a cushion. She had always been saving for someday. Someday her parents might need help, someday Chelsea might stumble, someday there might be a family emergency. But as she stared at the farmhouse pictures, she felt a daring thought slip into her mind. What if someday was now? She scrolled to one house that stopped her cold. A white farmhouse, the paint peeling, the porch sagging just slightly, but with acres of green stretching behind it. The description read, "Needs some love, but full of potential." Haley's throat tightened. She whispered the words out loud. Needs some love, but full of potential. It felt like she was looking in a mirror. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, heart pounding. Could she really do this? Could she buy a home for herself, not because it was practical, not because it was expected, but because it was what she wanted? The silence of the apartment pressed in. For years, she had been waiting for her family to carve out a space for her, to make her feel like she belonged. But now she saw the truth they never would. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more strength than she had ever felt. If they won't give me a place, I'll make my own. And with that, she bookmarked the farmhouse listing, her heart beating with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Haley drove through winding country roads, the kind lined with trees that leaned in close, as if whispering secrets. Her GPS kept directing her to scattered properties across rural Maine. Most of them were tired, forgotten homes, structures that had seen better days but carried no warmth for her. The first house she visited was leaning on its foundation, windows cracked, the roof sagging. A heavy sadness clung to the place, like even the walls had given up. The second was too polished, renovated into something sterile, more like a vacation rental than a home. She walked through each doorway politely, but none of them stirred her heart. Then, late in the afternoon, her realtor stopped in front of a farmhouse at the end of a gravel road. The grass was overgrown, weeds climbing up the steps, and the white paint on the siding had faded into a dull gray. Yet when Haley stepped out of her car, a strange calm wrapped around her. She looked at the porch, sagging but still standing, and felt something she hadn't in years: possibility. Inside, the floorboards creaked beneath her shoes, every step releasing a groan as though the house had been waiting for someone to listen. The wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing layers of patterns from decades past. Dust danced in the beams of afternoon sunlight pouring through cracked windows. It wasn't grand, not in the way Chelsea's apartment in the city was, but it felt real. She touched the banister, running her fingers along the worn wood, imagining herself carrying groceries up the steps, maybe planting flowers in the yard. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a house. It was a place she could finally call her own, untouched by her parents' opinions or her sister's shadow. The realtor was still talking about repairs, roof inspections, and the cost of new plumbing, but Haley barely heard a word. Her eyes kept moving across the rooms, each one whispering to her in a language only she seemed to understand. By the time she reached the back door and stepped into the open yard, the decision was already alive inside her. Acres of land stretched out behind the house, wild and unkempt but breathtaking. She pictured mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings watching the sky shift into colors no city could ever offer, and days spent building something that was hers alone. Tears blurred her vision as she signed the papers a week later, her hand trembling as the pen scratched across the final line. She wasn't just buying property, she was reclaiming herself. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and set aside had led her to this moment. When the keys dropped into her hand, she held them tight against her chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. For the first time, she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself. It wasn't just a home. It was her freedom. When Haley shared the news about her new farmhouse, she expected indifference, but the reaction still stung. Chelsea was the first to respond, her laughter carrying through the phone like a slap. "You? In the country? That's hilarious. You can barely keep a houseplant alive, Haley. What are you going to do, raise chickens?" She snickered, as though her sister's happiness was nothing more than a joke. Their parents weren't much better. When Haley told her mother about the purchase, Linda sighed. "Sweetheart, I don't understand why you'd throw your savings away on something like that. Houses out there lose value. It's not a smart investment." Her father chimed in with the same patronizing tone. "You should have waited, maybe talked to us before making such a big decision. You're too impulsive sometimes." The words burrowed under her skin, but Haley refused to let them take root. For once in her life, she had followed her own heart, and she wasn't going to let their doubts poison it. So she stopped trying to convince them. She didn't explain the way the house made her feel, or how standing in that yard had filled her with a peace she hadn't known before. Instead, she simply said, "I'll be fine," and changed the subject. When Chelsea demanded, "At least invite us up so we can see this so-called farmhouse," Haley paused. For years she had longed to include them in her life, to feel their pride, to have their presence. But now she realized she wanted her new beginning to remain untouched by their judgment. "Maybe another time," she said coolly, already knowing that time would never come. Weeks turned into months, and Haley began to pull back. The calls she once made out of habit grew shorter, then stopped altogether. She no longer drove into the city for family dinners, where Chelsea was the star and she was the afterthought. When her parents left voicemails, she didn't rush to return them. There was no fight, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet drifting away, like a tide that had finally turned. Instead, she poured her energy into the farmhouse. She woke early to paint walls, her arms aching but her spirit light. She learned how to fix a leaky faucet by watching online tutorials. She planted a small patch of wildflowers by the porch and felt joy bloom inside her as they began to grow. Each task reminded her that she was building something of her own, brick by brick, choice by choice. The silence that used to feel lonely now felt freeing. Without the constant noise of their criticism, Haley could finally hear herself think. For the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing approval. She was creating her own world. And in that quiet, she found something she had been searching for all along: peace. Haley woke each morning with the sun streaming through the old farmhouse windows, the light catching on the dust that still lingered in the corners. The house was far from perfect, but to her, every crack and flaw was an invitation. She bought buckets of paint, brushes, and rollers, determined to bring life back into the faded walls. With music playing softly in the background, she painted room after room, her laughter echoing as she splattered paint on her clothes. For once, the mess was hers to make, and the transformation hers to claim. Outside, she began carving out a small garden. The soil was stubborn at first, hard and tangled with weeds, but Haley didn't mind. She knelt in the dirt, pressing seeds into the earth with her hands, imagining how they'd bloom in the spring. It was slow, sweaty work, but as she wiped her brow and looked over the neat rows, a pride swelled inside her. This wasn't something handed to her, like the gifts Chelsea always received. This was something she had made for herself. The fences around the property leaned, broken in places, but instead of calling a contractor, Haley decided to learn. She watched videos, studied instructions, and bought the tools she needed. The first day she tried, frustration nearly got the best of her, until she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Need a hand?" Derek, the diner waiter, stood at the gate with a toolbox in one hand and that same warm smile she remembered from her birthday night. She hadn't expected him, but something about his easy presence felt natural. He showed her how to steady the boards, how to hammer the nails without splitting the wood. They worked side by side, their conversation light, filled with small jokes and shared silences that never felt awkward. Over the next weeks, Derek came by occasionally, sometimes to help fix something, other times just to keep her company. He taught her how to patch a leaky pipe, how to replace a doorknob, and once even how to change a tire when her old car gave out in the driveway. There was no rush, no expectation between them, just a gentle friendship built on kindness and respect. Every improvement in the house became a mirror of the change inside her. The bright walls reflected her newfound confidence. The garden sprouting little green shoots mirrored her growing independence. The sturdy fences reminded her that she could protect her peace and set boundaries where she never had before. One evening, as she stood on the porch looking out at the land she had worked so hard to reclaim, Haley realized she no longer felt the ache of being overlooked. She wasn't waiting for anyone to notice her, to choose her, or to validate her worth. With every nail hammered, every flower planted, every wall repainted, she was proving it to herself. She was enough. And that was all she needed. It had been months since Haley last heard more than a quick voicemail from her parents, so when her phone buzzed with a late-night call, she hesitated before answering. On the other end was her mother's voice, shaky and softer than usual. "Sweetheart, we need to talk." At first, Haley thought something was wrong with their health, but the truth was different. Chelsea's latest business venture, a trendy boutique she had bragged about endlessly on social media, had collapsed. Rent, suppliers, and loans had piled up, and now her parents were caught in the mess too, since they had co-signed some of the loans to give Chelsea a real shot. What had once been champagne toasts and photo shoots had turned into unpaid bills and angry creditors. Her father tried to sound calm, but Haley could hear the panic in his voice. "You've always been the responsible one, Haley. You've saved money, you manage your life so well. We were hoping, maybe you could step in and help us get back on our feet. Just until things smooth over." Haley sat in silence, the words pressing down on her chest. Memories flashed. The years she scraped through nursing school without a dime of their help, the birthdays overshadowed by Chelsea's milestones, the way they dismissed her farmhouse dream as a waste. And now, suddenly, she was the one they turned to because she had managed what they never gave her: stability. A few days later, Chelsea herself called, her tone anything but humble. "Haley, listen, I know things are rough right now, but it would really help if I could stay at your farmhouse for a while. Just until I figure things out. You've got all that space, and honestly, it's not like you're using it for anything important." The audacity of her sister's words stung, but it also clarified everything. They weren't reaching out because they wanted to mend broken bonds or finally see her as more than the forgotten daughter. They were reaching out because she had something they needed: money, security, space. Haley's fingers tightened around the phone. For years she had fantasized about hearing her parents say they needed her, but not like this. Not as a safety net for the sister they had always chosen over her. The love she had begged for was still absent. All that stood in its place was expectation. When she hung up, she walked out to the porch, the night air cool against her face. The field stretched out before her, calm and steady, unlike the chaos her family wanted to drag her into. For the first time, she saw it with perfect clarity. They didn't want her heart, her time, or her company. They only wanted her resources. And she would not hand them over. Not this time. This home, this peace, this life, she had built it for herself. It wasn't theirs to take. The invitation was short and polite, nothing more than a text that read, "Dinner at my place. Saturday, 6 p.m. Haley knew they would come. Curiosity alone would pull them in. For months, her parents and Chelsea had only seen the farmhouse through passing mentions or social media glimpses. Now, she was finally letting them step into her world, but not for the reason they thought. On Saturday evening, she set the table with care. The dining room, once faded and dusty, now glowed with warm light. Fresh flowers from her own garden sat in a vase at the center, and mismatched but polished dishes made the table feel alive with character. This was her space, her creation, and every detail carried the weight of her independence. When the knock came, she smoothed her dress and opened the door. Her parents stepped in first, eyes darting around, mouths slightly open. Chelsea followed, arms crossed, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Well," Chelsea muttered, scanning the walls and furniture, "it's nicer than I expected." Haley didn't bite. Instead, she guided them on a slow tour. She showed them the freshly painted kitchen, the garden outside the window, the repaired fences stretching across the land. With each room, she spoke of the work she had done, the hours she had poured into it. Not once did she mention their absence, but the silence between her words carried the truth. By the time they sat at the table, a strange tension filled the air. Her parents complimented the food, though awkwardly, as if they couldn't quite swallow the idea that she had built this life without them. Chelsea picked at her plate, her expression sour. Halfway through the meal, Haley set down her fork and looked at them, her voice steady. "For years, I begged for a seat at your table," she began. Her parents looked up, startled. Chelsea rolled her eyes. Haley pressed on. "I begged for attention, for love, for even the smallest sign that I mattered as much as she did." She gestured slightly toward her sister. "But you never made space for me." Her mother opened her mouth, but Haley didn't let her interrupt. "Now I have my own table, my own home, my own life, and I need you to understand, this seat is not open to you anymore. Not after everything." The room went silent, the weight of her words pressing down like a storm. Her father's fork clattered against the plate. Her mother's eyes welled with tears she didn't let fall. Chelsea pushed back from the table with a screech of her chair. "Unbelievable," she spat, storming toward the door. Haley sat still as the front door slammed shut. Pain pulsed through her chest, but underneath it was something stronger: liberation. She had spoken the words she had carried for years. For the first time, she wasn't asking to belong. She was declaring her freedom. And it felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. The sky was just beginning to soften from black to pale gold when Haley stepped out onto her porch, a mug of hot coffee warming her hands. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of dew and soil. Derek was already there, leaning back in a chair, his own cup balanced on his knee. He smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that didn't need words. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the birds stir awake and the world stretch into morning. Haley let the quiet wrap around her. For years, mornings had been rushed, alarms, hospital shifts, and obligations that left no room to breathe. Now, her mornings felt like gifts, moments she could actually claim as her own. She took a sip of coffee and let her eyes wander across the land. The fences she had mended stood sturdy, the garden rose neat and green, the old farmhouse steady against the rising light. Every piece of it carried her fingerprints, her sweat, her determination. It was more than property, it was proof. Her thoughts drifted back, uninvited but sharp, to the night of her birthday, to the empty chair at the restaurant, to the laughter she had imagined at Chelsea's celebration. That memory used to sting so deeply it left her breathless. Now she saw it differently. It wasn't just betrayal, it had been the spark. Without that heartbreak, she might never have looked for something better. Thinking about them? Derek asked softly, not pushing, just noticing. Haley nodded. A little, but not the way I used to. I don't feel small anymore. She paused, searching for the right words. They broke me in a way, but they also pushed me here. And here is where I finally found myself. Derek lifted his mug in a small toast. Sounds like you won. She smiled at that. It wasn't the kind of victory her sister would flaunt on social media, or the kind her parents would understand. It wasn't loud or glittering. It was quiet, steady, and whole. Revenge hadn't come from anger or payback. It had come from living well, from proving to herself that she didn't need their approval to thrive. As the sun lifted higher, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, Haley leaned back in her chair and exhaled. The weight she had carried for nearly 3 decades no longer pressed on her shoulders. She wasn't waiting for anyone to choose her anymore. She had chosen herself, her peace, her joy, her freedom. Her gaze swept over the land one last time, a smile curving her lips. This was her life now, born from pain but rebuilt with love, determination, and courage. For the first time, Haley didn't feel like the overlooked daughter. She felt like the woman who had finally claimed her place in the world. And in that golden morning light, she felt completely, finally chosen. Do you think Haley was right to cut ties and build her own life? Or should she have given her family another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear them. And if you enjoy stories like this one, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter.